Welcome to the I Now Pronounce You Divorced podcast, where we have three award-winning family law attorneys dive into intriguing topics like divorce, military divorce, custody and visitation, trust and estate planning, and all things family law. Join us as we provide a comprehensive viewpoint through the eyes of our experts and guests, aiming to educate and soothe our listeners. Get ready to tune in because I Now Pronounce You Divorced starts right now.
Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our inaugural family law podcast. This is I Now Pronounce You Divorced with Rebecca Malone and Charles Hatley of Malone Hatley PC. We're a family and estate law firm based in Virginia and North Carolina. And today we're going to be talking with Charles Hatley about getting started in divorce and what you should and should not do, right? Do's and don'ts for what happens at those initial stages of divorce. So first, let me welcome and introduce Charles Hatley, who is our partner and was initially the litigation partner of Malone Hatley, is now more an operations role. But welcome, Charles. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Rebecca. My name is Charles Hatley, and I work with Malone Hatley PC. My background is I have been in family law almost since getting out of law school. And I came into family law somewhat, I don't want to say begrudgingly, but I had not yet seen the light of everything that family law could offer. And by that, I mean, being able to work with people through some of the toughest times in their lives and keeping your head on straight to really focus in on what's important, making sure that the relationship is dissolved appropriately, making sure the assets are taken care of carefully, and making sure to approach this in a really professional manner. So that really has been my goal since coming into family law, and then jumping over to join Rebecca Malone Law really was our goal to continue that level of practice towards family law.
Got it. Okay, so we get this call not infrequently where one person has decided, okay, this is it, it's enough, I'm done. What do I do next? And so when you get that call from someone who's like, we're still living together, but we had the conversation last night, we both want to get a divorce, what do I do now? What's your step number one for that person?
Well, the first thing I do is I talk to the client. I say, look, was yesterday the day that you decided to get a divorce? The separation in each jurisdiction is a little bit different, but most jurisdictions, when they talk about separation, they're talking about when did you decide that the marriage was over? And what I tell people is step one is when you decide the marriage was over. That generally is not the day that you called the divorce attorney. Very, very rarely do we talk to somebody and on the phone, by email, they contact our organization that, hey, today was the first day I've ever thought about divorce, and now I'm ready to move forward. So really step one is, when did you truly decide that you wanted a divorce, so that we can start identifying what the date of separation really is pursuant to the statute.
Got it. And so date of separation does not mean someone's moved out, right?
It really doesn't. Now, in North Carolina, you have to be separated for a year and a day, and there are certain requirements for not being present in the home. Virginia is a little bit more liberal in its approach, and a lot of the different courts, it's a little more liberal, where your separation can be in the home, that you held yourself out, that you were no longer married. And in fact, in Virginia, separation is defined by the point at which the intent formed in one party's mind. I mean, you can't get much of a softer definition than that. So when did you decide that you wanted to be divorced in Virginia? That can be used as the date of separation.
Got it. And so after you've figured out or mostly figured out what that date of separation is going to be, what do you advise the client to do next?
It's a big question because once you decide that you're separated, deciding what to do next is huge. And it's relying upon a lot of factors, right? Do you have children? Do you have property together? Is everything that you own, if you own houses, is it all within Virginia or North Carolina? Or do you have property all around the country or even in different countries? What does your bank account situation look like? Do you have joint or separate bank accounts? How is your insurance set up? Your health insurance, your car insurance, any other life insurances that you have? What about your cell phone plan? What about your credit cards? What about your cars, your titling? So there's all these questions that we start going over. And what that really gets to is the second step is you start putting together a plan. I always like to say proper planning prevents poor performance. And that rings true through almost anything you do. So with our clients, we sit down and we say, okay, let's talk about all the things that you have. Real property, the houses that you have, personal property, the cars, the bank accounts, everything that you have. Now let's talk about any debts that you have, mortgages on home, credit card debt, any other secured or unsecured debt that you may have. And let's talk about your children. How old are your children? How many children do you have? Do you have any children from another marriage? And then we talk very openly about how much money do you make? How much money does your partner make? From there, we can start identifying everything that is part of the divorce estate. What is going to be divided in divorce? What are the things that we need to talk about? Then this very quickly flows into step 3. And so step 2 and step 3 go hand in hand. Step 3 is, what do you want? We sit down and we talk to the client. We say, okay, you've laid out everything that you have right now. And I always like to envision it on a physical piece of paper. It's not always on a piece of paper, but on a physical piece of paper. Draw a line straight down the middle. This is what I want. This is what I want the other person to have. This is what I want from the house. This is what I want from the bank accounts. This is the custody and visitation schedule I want with the children. And start for the first time thinking about, what do you want the end of your marriage to look like?
Right. A lot of the time, clients haven't really gone through that mentally. They've gotten to the point of, I can't make this work anymore. I know that this doesn't work. But they haven't necessarily gotten to that point of, well, what would a custody schedule look like? How would we do visitation? How are we going to divide the bank accounts? Is somebody going to keep the house? Am I going to be getting child support or spousal support or anything like that? They haven't gone through those questions. So how do you get into that conversation without making it really overwhelming for the client? How do you approach these sort of big topics and help them create that plan or shape those goals?
The first thing I do in talking with the client is you can pretty quickly ascertain what's most important. If a client comes to you and they say, I don't want to pay child support, okay, money is on the top of their mind. If they come to you and they say, look, my kids, I need to be able to see my kids more. I want to see my kids more. I know the children are on the top of their mind. And so I will start where they want to start. The idea is, I've been here before. We do a lot of divorces. We help a lot of people through this process. So allowing the client to start where he or she wants to start and then work our way around to everything that we need to cover with our guidance usually is a much better way to go than me holding up a piece of paper and saying, okay, I've got this checklist. Check 1. Are you married? Yes. Check 2. Do you have children? What are their names? What are their ages? Check 3. Do you have any real property? And the whole time the client's sitting there just waiting to tell you something, but can't. And so much is derived just by letting the client start where they want to start and tell you what they want to tell you. Because in this process, for a lot of people getting divorced, the reality is they're getting a divorce because of a breakdown in a relationship. Somebody hasn't been listening to them, more than likely. So being that person that steps up and listens and takes notes and says, look, I don't know if everything that you want is possible, but we're going to work our butts off in order to achieve your goals.
Right. Yeah, that's so important. There's a fine line sometimes when you're somebody's divorce attorney and when you're their therapist, right? I can listen to you vent a little bit and I can tell you how we can use this in your case to direct things where they need to go. But sometimes maybe that person needs some outside assistance, or a therapist or maybe a support group or something like that to also be involved in. Do you ever recommend that somebody move out of the house right away? They call you up, they say, okay, I'm ready for a divorce. I've got an apartment lined up. Should I go ahead and move? Is that usually what you would recommend that they do?
We don't make any recommendations without talking to somebody. So if somebody calls up, says, look, do I need to move out? Well, the answer is pump the brakes a little bit. Let's talk about what's going on. At this point in time, hopefully I will know a lot about the client. I will know a lot about the backstory, but sometimes I don't. Sometimes the first or second phone call, it'll be, hey, I'm getting ready to move out. I'm getting ready to pack my bags and move out. And I always tell people, well, before you do that, let's look at the entire situation. Why are you moving out? Number one. And the why is very important because unfortunately, and I say unfortunately very much so on purpose, unfortunately, we have been bombarded with media about what divorce looks like. Divorce looks like one person packing their bags and walking out the door to go get milk or cigarettes and never coming back. And the other person left there to fend for themselves in the house, maybe also take care of the children. It's not the way it should be. If your why is, I want to move out because that's what I think I should do, well, then don't. Because if you move out, you could be stuck paying, if you are the primary wage earner, you could be stuck paying for your apartment. You could be stuck paying for the house. You could get child support and spousal support turned on. And before you know it, you don't have any money left over to even buy groceries or support yourself because you've burdened yourself with this rent. If, however, you're moving out and you call up and say, look, I can't take the abuse anymore. I'm packing my bags. I'm moving out. Now, if there's no children involved and there's been abuse, my advice is going to be call the police. Call the police before you leave. Have them come out to the house. If there's been abuse, exert your rights. One of the troubling things that we're seeing is, and I think this has been going on for a very long time, men will not call the police and report domestic violence, even when they're victims of domestic violence. And so when I get a call from a male client to be like, oh, well, my spouse hit me, my spouse did this, my spouse did that. And I'm like, that's domestic violence, man. You need to call and get yourself protected. And they're like, oh, no, I'm twice the size of my spouse. They can never hurt me. And I'm like, it's not about that. It's about the breakdown of the marriage. And you don't know what the next thing is going to be. If they're willing to physically attack you, knowing that you're twice their size, what else are they willing to do while you're asleep? What are they willing to say in court that you did to them? What happens when they talk to an attorney and the attorney's like, hey, if there's any sort of domestic issue, you need to call the police. So if you're moving out because of that, my advice would probably be like, look, call the police first, but you do need to get the heck out of the house. You need to protect yourself. If there's children involved, my advice is take the kids with you. You have to take the children with you. One of the things that we hear frequently is the courts are very biased. They're biased against men. Well, that's not necessarily untrue. The courts seem to be most biased against people that leave the home and leave the children behind. And I think that that's most accurate. Generally, what we see is the man will leave the home because they think that that's the right thing to do, and they'll leave the wife with the children. And then by the time you get to court, the judge is sitting there saying, well, sir, you left the house. You left the wife with the kids. So my advice is if you're going to leave and there's domestic violence, take the kids with you. Set up a place for the kids to live. Because it's also important not to move into a studio apartment and then show up to court one day and say, ooh, I want 50-50 custody visitation. And the judge goes, well, where are your children going to sleep? Well, I guess they'll sleep in the kitchenette of my studio apartment. Have these plans set before you do anything. So really, you need to plan before you move out.
Yeah, absolutely. And the abuse piece is so important. And sometimes you don't hear about it for several months. You'll be well into a case when the client finally tells you, oh yeah, well, she did attack me one time. And, I had a client that the wife had actually attacked him with a beer bottle. She had slammed it over his head and he had this scar and he had these stitches and all this stuff. And he just didn't think to tell me about it for several months. And then she was making all these allegations about he had abused her and he had done this and he had done that and he was such a terrible guy. And then the story came out and he was like, well, okay, yeah, I yelled at her, but like she hit me with a beer bottle. I was pretty upset, so I yelled at her. And, if we had known at the beginning of the case, right, that sort of sets the tone. And if you wait until you're 6 months in, you're a year in, and now you bring it up, now it's not going to look authentic to a judge, right? They're going to say, why are you only bringing this up now? Clearly there's some sort of underlying motive. And that's really frustrating. So starting with the reason, starting with why, right? It comes back to starting with why. Why are you moving out? What happened? What was the final straw? And getting that full story. So then we can make sure we're moving forward the right way. How do you deal with it when somebody comes to you and they say, oh, well, I've I've seen this before. My sister got a divorce last year, and she got the house and she got the kids and she did this and she did that. So I'm not worried about it, or whatever the story might be. How do you advise that client? What are your recommendations based on that kind of a story?
We're getting that more and more, right? As social media proliferates, as Google and any other search engine proliferates information, we get it a lot. Look, my best friend's friend got, they had a house, they had kids, and, he or she got 100% of the house, 100% custody, and they get spouse support, child support, even though they make more money. And I'm like, then go hire that attorney, because apparently that attorney walks on water. It's just not very likely to happen. I also am very open with people. I say, look, the reality is, if Google was as good as an attorney, we wouldn't have jobs, because at the end of the day, we get a lot of business from people that have gone onto Google and who have trusted their friends and gone into the courts on their own, started this process, and have messed up in some fashion. We get a lot of business going back and fixing those problems. And I tell everybody up front, the easiest thing to do is to not create the problem in the first place. It'd be like going in and trying to cut out your own appendix. I easily can grab a knife and cut through my abdomen and start digging around in there. But I promise you, it's going to hurt, and I'm going to cause a lot of problems, and it's going to cost me a lot more money than if I just went to a doctor and said, look, man, can you get me sewed up and fixed up the right way without me messing around and causing more problems?
Right. Such a terrible but accurate analogy, right? And we do see that a lot. We see people that they try to do some cheapy online do it yourself type of a thing, or they use something that a friend typed up, and then someone's not paying, or then someone's not doing what they're supposed to do, and they have this terrible agreement that is not enforceable, or not enforceable in the way they thought it was, and they've now got a whole lot more work to do. We've got a whole lot more work to do to try and undo it or redo it or whatever at this point.
And you kind of bring up the agreement, and that goes back to moving out, right? You want to have something in place. If you're moving out, just say, look, I can't be around this person anymore. That's really where we start talking about a separation agreement. And, you brought up the agreements that people find online. And, I always tell people, if you send me the agreement that you found online, I promise you within 10 minutes, I can find a mistake within that agreement that will end up giving away almost all of your rights, a huge amount of rights. And, in Virginia specifically, they changed the wording that's required in these separation agreements so frequently. For example, the language regarding spousal support. If you mess up and say, I waive spousal support, it's done. You can never go back and undo it. And that's a very big thing. Or a horror story I saw was where a gentleman had signed a separation agreement that there was a typo. He thought that he signed a separation agreement agreeing to $500 a month in spousal support. And in reality, there was a typo. So instead of 500.00, it was 3 zeros with a period and a 10. So it clearly said $5,000. And the wife, after he started dating again, the ex-wife became very vindictive and said, I want my $5,000 a month. And the court was like, I can't do anything about it. It's a signed contract that says you're going to pay her $5,000 a month. We can all agree that was supposed to be 500, but that doesn't matter. It says 5,000.
Wow, that's horrible. And to think what he would have saved, right? If you pay a little bit in the attorney's fees to get the advice, then net long term, you would have been so much better off. I know I had a client where they had gone back and forth writing their own agreements, and there ended up being an issue because there was a page swapped out. So one of the numbers was wrong on one of the pages, and the other person said, oh, let me just print out a new page 8, and I'll just print out this new page 8 with the change, and we'll initial it and whatever. And now we have these competing instruments. And so again, everybody's got to go hire attorneys. We've got to figure out what's the controlling term, and everyone gets penalized because we didn't just do a good agreement up front and make sure that it made sense and that all the terms were straightforward and agreed to. What do you find to be different when you go like county by county or judge by judge? How different are things, even just within the same state or across state lines? And does that impact the advice that you give someone when they're at the very beginning stages of a divorce?
It's very different. Especially county by county, because you believe like, hey, I'm in the same state, North Carolina, Virginia, it's going to follow their laws. Everything's going to be the same no matter which courthouse I go into. But the reality, it's not. We still have human judges for now. Maybe AI will take over that role one day, but it hasn't yet. But we still have human judges that have human reactions to things brought to them. And what I mean by that is, we talked a little bit about calling the police in instances of domestic violence. Domestic violence and protective orders or orders of protection are wildly different county by county, because you will go in and talk to one a magistrate or judge or official, and you'll say, look, the person yelled, screamed, threw something in my direction, and I am terrified that they're going to do something to me again. Boom, that's good enough. You're going to get a protective order. Then you go to a different county, and even if it might be neighboring county, and you say, look, kind of the same thing, person threw something at me, didn't hit me, but I'm afraid that they're going to continue to do something. And that official, the magistrate or the judge, will say, well, there's no bodily harm. I'm not giving you the protective order. There was, up in Loudoun County, I believe, very recently, Loudoun County, Virginia, there was a case where the court denied a protective order for somebody that was in jail. The person went and tried to get a protective order against somebody that was in jail. The court's reasoning was, well, they're in jail. You don't need a protective order. And the court refused to listen if the person was getting out of jail. So the person got out of jail and we killed the person that went and requested the protective order. And that is currently a huge lawsuit that's going up on Loudoun County, because the victim, she had gone and requested the protective order. The judge, she turned down the protective order. She said, you don't need a protective order. The person's in jail. What will a protective order do for you? And, the allegations are that the victim was trying to explain to the court, well, he's supposed to get out of jail within 2 weeks. I need help. And they did nothing. The guy got out of jail, and now, unfortunately, she's dead. And that can show you just how vastly different it is, because, in other jurisdictions like Virginia Beach, for instance, if you'd walked in and you requested that protective order, you would have gotten it under that circumstance.
Right. And I can think of a lot of different custody outcomes that I've seen county by county and city by city. I know in one courthouse that's a little bit more rural, a little bit more out there. I saw a judge specifically revoke visitation because the father had a live-in girlfriend. And the judge said in his ruling, I don't want to expose this child to an unmarried relationship. And you go almost anywhere else across the state that I've been in, and people have boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever, that live in. And unless they're, a drug addict or a criminal or somehow dangerous or something like that, usually a judge is not going to completely cut off visitation. And so when you have somebody that calls in that lives in that area, you can tailor your advice a little bit more and say, look, just, because you're in this particular region, this is going to be a bigger concern for your situation, for your case.
And that's 100% right. And, that's why we strive to have practitioners all across the state, rather than just having one person try to remember everything. I always joke, if I had to remember everything, I would forget what color paper to print certain recipes on. But our attorneys up in Northern Virginia know that right away. The attorneys that we have in Richmond understand the courts in Richmond and the certain requirements there and what to expect. So, when we give advice to our clients, it's not based on generalities. It's based on the very specifics of, this is what you are going through. And based on my experience in the county that you live in or the city that you live in, this is what's likely going to happen. And based on that experience, these are the steps that we now need to take. And I think that is a very important distinction that needs to be made for the different courts across any jurisdiction, any state. Every county is going to be a little bit different. Every judge is going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about taking some solicited or unsolicited advice from friends and family members. What do you tell a new client about social media as they're just starting out in their divorce?
Social media, I tell them to get off social media. And this is coming from somebody that has always been afraid of social media, for lack of a better word. I tell them to get off social media immediately. However, that comes with a caveat. If you've done something on social media, if you've posted things on social media that would be useful to the other side through discovery may be able to go and grab that from you. They can make you turn it over and say, hey, I want you to download all of the messages that you message back and forth on Facebook or Instagram or whatever platform you're using. And so it's really advisable, be very careful about what you lay out into the public hemisphere. Even if your Facebook, your Instagram, or your social media account is set with the highest level of privacy, it doesn't mean that somebody else can't come in and like one of your comments. So let's say you have your privacy settings up to as private as it can get, and your best friend who has no privacy settings jumps in, leaves a message on one of your posts where you say, look, I hate my ex-spouse. I hope they die in a fiery car crash. So now they jump in, they like it, they post, ha, 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 you're funny. I hope he dies too. It has now taken your private post out into your friend's privacy settings, which may or may not exist. So now eventually it will get back to your partner. And even things that are that bombastic, I hope you die in a fiery car crash, the court doesn't want to see it. Judges do not want to see that you are unable to control your emotions in a public forum like that, because it's a really good example of how you act in private. So you want to be very careful, even before you hire an attorney. Just be careful what you put on social media platforms, because to say it can be used against you would be an understatement. More likely, it will be used against you.
Absolutely. I mean, we've all gone into trial, and the other side comes in with a whole binder full, and they've got screenshots, and they've got chats, they've got emails, they've got text messages, they've got it all. And I know I've had some situations where, kind of like you were saying, it was just the client had liked something, right? So someone else in the universe had posted some, like a meme or something else that said, like this if you hate your ex, or, just something kind of goofy like that. And they didn't think about it, and they were scrolling through, and they hit the like button, right? Now that's a screenshot, and that mutual friend who's friends with you and friends with your ex on Facebook is going to go turn around and share it with them. They're going to screenshot it, share it with them. Now their attorney has it, and it's going to be coming up in court. We also see plenty of, these sort of intermediary friends that get on the chat and ask you questions, right? Oh, so didn't you go meet up with that guy, or didn't you go and do this, or, and now all of a sudden they're taking those screenshots and turning right back around to your ex. And they're coming back to haunt you every step of the way.
Another mistake we see people that they think their spouse's family is going to take their side. So, they start sending emails or social media messages to like their spouse's mom. And I tell everybody, I don't care what you think. I don't care what kind of relationship you believe that you have with your spouse's mom. Blood runs thicker than water. And that's the way it's going to be when this is all said and done. So, I will tell people, if I was in your spouse's position and you were talking to my mom, I'd be like, hey, mom, can you gather all this stuff for me? Get them to say all these bad things for me. I'd be setting you up from here to tomorrow. And so you need to watch out for that.
Right. And I have had a couple of cases, but it has been few and far between where I've seen, and, the in-laws family support my client for whatever reason, because their child had been abusive or had cheated, or, something major had happened like that. But out of, the hundreds and hundreds of cases that we've handled, I would say it's been 1 or 2 times that I've seen something like that. Otherwise it's the screenshots and the sharing, and it's coming right back to haunt you. All right. Well, I think this wraps up our first inaugural episode of I Now Pronounce You Divorced. Thank you so much for joining us again. My name is Rebecca Malone with Malone Hatley PC. We had Charles Hatley on with us, and we hope to see you next week. In the meantime, please reach out with your questions, anything you want to hear about, and we'll be happy to help.
Thank you for tuning into our podcast. If you found this episode helpful and you want more informational content, please be sure to subscribe and join us on all major social media platforms, including YouTube. Stay connected for more exciting updates and tips.